Welcome back, students, to the next session of A Horse and Two Goat, which was written by Mr. R.K. Narayan. If you remember, in the last session, we have already introduced you to the author and to the summary of the chapter. So let's begin with the next prose. Of the 700,000 dotting the map of India, Kritham was probably the tiniest indicated on the district survey map by a microscopic dot. But its size did not prevent its giving itself the grandiose name Kritham, which meant in Tamil coronet or crown on the brow of this subcontinent. So we come back that we have been introduced to the small town which is called Kritham. It is almost like a microscopic dot, and though it's a small dot, but the name has been very impressive, and in a superficial style it was given Kritham, which meant a crown. The village consisted of less than 30 houses, only one of them built with brick and cement. So there was only 30 houses which existed in that village, and only one house was made out of concrete. Rest all the houses were thatched huts or the clay huts, painted a brilliant yellow and blue all over with gorgeous carvings of gods and gargoyle on its balustrade. It was known as the Big House. So with all the colors which were used, which was bright yellow and blue, it had gorgeous carving of gods depicting on that house. And the house had human carvings on them. Balustrade, it's actually a railing formed by ornamental balcony. That is the balcony which was there. It was intricate, and it had an ornamental design and decorative design on it. It was known as the Big House. It was called as the Big House. The other houses, distributed in 4 streets, were generally of bamboo, thatch, straw, mud, and other unspecified materials. So they were all temporary houses which were made of thatched and which needed renovation after a certain time. Muni's was the last house in the 4th street, beyond which stretched the fields. In his prosperous days, Muni had owned a flock of 40 sheep and goats and sailed forth every morning, driving the flock to the highway a couple of miles away. There he would sit on the pedestal of a clay statue of a horse while his cattle grazed around. He carried a crook at the end of the bamboo pole and snapped foliage from the avenue trees to feed his flock. He also gathered fagots and dry sticks, bundled them, and carried them home for fuel at sunset. So we are introduced first to the small village which exists called Kritham. Secondly, in this first paragraph itself, we are introduced to the protagonist called Muni. Now, who was Muni? Muni was, at the present time, an old man. But when he had an existence of his prosperous days, he had 40 sheep and goats, and he ensured that the flock would go to highway for cattle grazing. And he would even carry a bamboo stick with a hook on it, which would help him to pluck the foliage for the cattle to eat. And then he would gather all the fagots, that is a bundle of sticks and dry sticks which are found together, and would get them back home as a fuel during the sunset. His wife lit the domestic fire at dawn, boiled water in mud pot, threw to it a handful of millet flour, added salt, and gave him his first nourishment for the day. So he was provided with the first nourishment of the day with a handful of millet flour and salt to it, and that was what he had in the morning hours. And when he started out, she would put it in his hand, a packed lunch, once again, same millet, cooked into meat, little balls, which he could swallow with the raw onion at the midday. So in the afternoon, he would eat those millet balls, but cooked in a little different manner, and he could have them with raw onion during the midday. So there are two things which one needs to focus here: the rural background, which speaks about how simplicity and how simple people were. They survived on millet, which was part of their food habit, and besides that, India being a tropical climate, onion is a part of their daily nourishment. His fortunes had declined gradually, unnoticed. From a flock of 40 which he drove into pen at night, his stock had now come down to 2 goats. Now there has been a decline in his fortune. Initially, there were 40, and he would drive 40 of them into their house or into the pen, and in the present scenario, he is just left with 2 of them, which were tethered to the trunk of the drumsticks, that is, which were chained to the trunk of a drumstick tree, which grew in front of his hut, and from which occasionally Munni would shake down drumsticks, and occasionally he would shake down that tree, the branches, and would get the drumsticks down so that they could have some sumptuous meal. This morning he got 6. He carried them in with a sense of triumph. Now this morning he had 6, and he carried it back home with a sense of a triumph, with a sense of joy. Although no one could say precisely who owned the tree, it was his because he lived in its shadow. Now nobody could say that to whom did that tree belong to, but because the shadow, under that shadow Munni lived, so a tree had come to belong to Munni and his family. His wife said, "If you were content with the drumstick leaves alone, I could boil and salt some for you." So he says, if you are content with the drumstick leaves, I'll boil it and put some salt for you in that. "Oh, I am tired of eating those leaves. I have a craving to chew drumstick out of the sauce, I tell you." Now he says, "I'm tired of eating the same meal every day, the boiled food with the salt in it. I would love to have some curry." Here he speaks about the sauce. Basically, it talks about the Indian curry, which is made out of onion and tomatoes and the other ingredients. So he says, "I would love to chew those drumsticks, enjoy the juice of it, and would relish my meal." "You have only 4 teeth in your jaw, but your craving is for a big thing." So he says you are just left with 4 teeth in your jaw, and you are craving for such big things. She agrees. She says, "All right, get the stuff for the sauce, and I will prepare it for you. After all, next year you may not be alive to ask for anything." Now she puts that in sarcasm, and she says that maybe the next year you might not be alive to even enjoy this. "But first, get me all the stuff. That is, first you need to get me all the ingredients, including a measure of rice or millet. I will satisfy your unholy craving. Our store is empty today." So she informs that our store is empty. We have nothing left inside. So you need to fill that up. Dal, chili, curry leaves, mustard, coriander, gingerly oil, and 1 large potato. So everything is over. You need to get them if you want to have a curry. Go out and get all this. He repeated the list after her in order not to miss any item, and walked off to the shop in the 3rd street, and walked off towards the shop where the provisions were provided to him. Now Munni went and sat patiently on an upturned packing case below the platform of the shop. Now he went and he sat down on on one of the boxes which were not open. The shopman did not pay any attention. Munni kept clearing his throat, coughing and sneezing, until the man could not stand it anymore and demanded, "What ails you?" So, to get the attention of the shopkeeper, Munni tries to clear the throat. He sneezes, he coughs, so that he can get the attention of the shopkeeper. But till it did not get irritating for the shopkeeper, he kept avoiding it. And once, when he got irritated with it, he shouts at him and he says, "What is the trouble with you? You will fly off that seat into the gutter if you sneeze so hard, young man." And he says, "You will fall down into that gutter if you sneeze so hard, young man." Munni laughed inordinately in order to please the shopman at being called young man. Munni started to laugh. It was an ironic laugh because he had already reached his old age, and just to have a pleasing effect on the shopkeeper, he keeps on laughing, making him appreciate the humor which he had created by using the word young man. This completely won the shopman over. He liked his sense of humor to be appreciated. By this humoring the shopman, Munni could always ask for 1 or 2 items of food, promising repayment later. With just pleasing the shopkeeper by this humor, he could get some items from the food shop, promising him that he would pay him later. Some days the shopman was in good mood and gave in, and some days the shopkeeper was in good mood and he would give in. And sometimes he would lose his temper and suddenly bark at Munni for daring to ask for credit, and sometimes he would just snub him for asking him for the credit. The shopman said, "If you could find 5 rupees and a quarter, you will have paid off an ancient debt." Now he says, if you can find 5 rupees and a quarter of it, you will be able to pay back the old debt. "How much have you got now?" He says, "How much do you have now?" So immediately he realizes his helplessness and he says, "I'll pay you everything on the 1st of the next month." He says, "I'll pay you everything on the 1st of the next month. As always, and whom do you expect to rob by then?" And he says, "As always, you just need to delay it. But anyway, what do you expect? Whom do you plan to rob this time?" Munni felt caught and mumbled. Now Munni felt that he was trapped in a situation, and he mumbled, "My daughter has sent word that she will be sending me money." So he says that my daughter has sent me a word that she will send me a money. So the shopkeeper says, "Have you a daughter? That is, do you even have a daughter? And she's sending you money. For what purpose, may I know?" So the shopkeeper questions him, "Do you have a daughter? And is she sending you money? And for what reason is she sending you money?" "Birthday, 50th birthday," said Munni quietly. He spoke in whisper. "Birthday. How old are you?" the shopkeeper asked him. Munni repeated weakly, not being sure of it himself. 50th. He always calculated his age from the time of the great famine, when he stood as high as the parapet around the village well. But who could calculate such thing accurately nowadays with so many famines occurring? The shopman felt encouraged when other customers stood around to watch and comment. Now the shopkeeper had people as audience, so he liked to comment on it, and he was ready to pour him with sarcasm. "More likely you are 70, he said to Munni. So he tells Munni again in sarcasm that more likely you are 70 years old. "You also forgot that you mentioned a birthday 5 weeks ago when you wanted castor oil for your holy bath." Now he says you also mentioned that your birthday passed 5 weeks ago when you wanted castor oil for your holy bath. At this, Munni unobtrusively rose and moved off. At this point, he just got up suddenly and he just moved away from that place. With this, we come into this session. We'll continue in the next class.